Sometimes the most dangerous threats don't come from the outside. They come from the very people who claim to protect us. In a quiet, gated community in Elk Grove, California, residents of Fairgrove Estates thought they were safe. With its manicured lawns, porch lights glowing in perfect rows, and an HOA board that promised order, it looked like the picture of suburban peace. But under that surface, tension was brewing. Tension that would explode one summer night into a confrontation that left neighbors shaken, reputations destroyed, and a community divided. It all centered around one man, Douglas Brinton. He wasn't law enforcement. He wasn't licensed security. But to hear him tell it, he was the neighborhood's last line of defense. He wore a reflective vest stitched with his name. He carried a pistol on his hip. And he patrolled the streets as though they were his personal jurisdiction. To some, Douglas was a hero, always watching, always ready to confront anyone he thought didn't belong. To others, he was a ticking time bomb, waiting for the wrong moment to prove his authority. That wrong moment came when Douglas crossed paths with a woman he didn't recognize. A woman he thought was a stranger trespassing into his neighborhood. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that this woman was not only his neighbor, but also one of the highest trained federal officers in the country. Her name was Simone Kerns, an FBI tactical commander, a woman who had spent 20 years teaching agents how to stay calm under pressure, how to neutralize threats, and how to make sure civilians made it home safe. She had faced traffickers, hostage takers, and cartel enforcers. She had stood in lobbies, garages, and dark alleys with guns pointed at her face. And she had walked out alive. But that night, she wasn't leading a team. She wasn't armed with a tactical unit. She wasn't even on duty. She was a tired mother coming home from a long day of work, pulling into her driveway with her garage remote in hand. That's when Douglas stepped into her path, blocking her car, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol. What happened next turned a quiet cul-de-sac into a stage for chaos. Neighbors peered through blinds, phones tilted to record. Arguments would erupt. Allegiances would be tested. And before the night was over, a man who thought he was keeping the community safe would be sitting in handcuffs, his reputation shattered, and his neighbors forced to ask themselves, what does safety really mean? This is the story of how a self-proclaimed protector pointed a gun at the wrong woman. The story of how paranoia turned into a standoff. And the story of how an HOA, once united by the illusion of safety, became divided by the truth. And it all began in one driveway. Imagine coming home after a long day, only to have your own driveway turned into a crime scene by a man claiming to protect your neighborhood. That's exactly what happened to FBI Tactical Commander Simone Kerns, and what unfolded next left an entire community stunned. The night was supposed to end quietly for Simone. She had just left a late strategy meeting at the FBI field office in Sacramento, her mind still running through reports and follow-ups. By the time she turned her SUV off the main road and into the gated neighborhood of Fairgrove Estates in Elk Grove, California, she was already planning tomorrow. Her 7 a.m. run, her daughter's school drop-off, and the noon briefing she had to lead. Nothing in her schedule hinted at chaos. But sometimes trouble doesn't wait for an invitation. Sometimes it parks itself right in front of you. Simone tapped the clicker clipped to her visor, and the iron gate swung open. She eased into the subdivision, passing rows of identical two-story homes with manicured lawns and glowing porch lights. Her own townhouse sat near the back corner lot, marked by a maple tree she had loved from the day she purchased the property 3 months earlier. But as she slowed in front of her driveway, she noticed a figure already standing there. A man, arms crossed, feet planted wide, as if he owned the concrete she had paid for. The glare from his high-visibility vest caught her headlights, but what made her muscles tighten was the gun on his hip. He wasn't law enforcement, that much she could tell immediately. His stance was too sloppy, too loose for a trained officer. She stopped the car and rolled her window halfway down. "Evening. Can I help you?" The man stepped forward, planting himself in the middle of her driveway. He looked mid-50s, stocky build, with a salt and pepper buzz cut. His vest read Douglas Brinton. You live here. His tone wasn't friendly. It was a test. Simone reached for the garage remote, ready to prove her point. But Douglas didn't move. Instead, he tapped his fingers on the grip of his holstered pistol. This is private property. Residents only. You don't look familiar. Her jaw tightened, not in anger, but in focus. She had faced men like him before. Hostage takers, paranoid suspects, cornered traffickers. The difference was she never expected the same hostility to greet her just a few feet from her own front door. She kept her voice calm. She told him her unit number, ready to open her garage. But Douglas didn't back down. I haven't seen you at the HOA meetings, he pressed. And around here we keep track. Tension spread down the street. Curtains twitched. Porch lights clicked on. Neighbors peered through blinds. Phones raised discreetly. Then came the metallic snap. Douglas unclipped his holster and pulled the gun halfway free. The sound froze the night. Simone's training kicked in. Heartbeat steady. Breathing measured. She didn't flinch. But the danger was real. A man with no training, clutching a deadly weapon, convinced he was a protector. She projected her voice across the neighborhood. My name is Simone Kerns, Unit 314. I live here. You can check property records tomorrow. But this needs to stop. Her calmness only seemed to irritate him. His nostrils flared. His voice sharpened. Don't lie to me. You don't belong here. From across the street, a woman's timid voice broke the silence. Doug. Maybe she does live here. Douglas snapped, waving the weapon wildly. Stay inside, Sharon. I've got this under control. Gasps rippled across the block. The gun was no longer a sidearm. It was now drawn, both hands gripping it. The barrel pointed directly at Simone's car window. Neighbors whispered. Phones recorded. Children clung to parents' legs on dimly lit porches. And there, in her own driveway, Simone Kerns, the woman who had trained federal agents in tactical response for 2 decades, stood face to face with a man who thought he was protecting his community by aiming a gun at her chest. She weighed her options. Reveal her badge too soon, and he might panic. Wait too long, and the night could end in tragedy. And before she could decide, Douglas took a step closer, the gun leveled with both hands, aimed straight at her. The standoff had begun. It was out now. No longer a suggestion. No longer a threat hovering on his hip. Douglas Brinton held it with both hands, aiming straight at Simone's car window. The street was dead silent except for the faint rustle of leaves from the oak tree on the corner. A single car rolled past on the cross street, slowed at the sight, then quickly sped away. Simone knew she had seconds to ground the situation before it tipped. She rolled her window fully down, leaned slightly forward, careful not to make sudden moves. Her tone stayed measured, calm but firm. Douglas didn't lower the weapon. His jaw flexed, his eyes sharp with suspicion. I've been watching this block every night for 3 years, he barked. I know who belongs, and I've never seen your face. Not once. His hands weren't steady. His trigger finger floated dangerously close, shifting with every breath. He was a man playing soldier, convinced he was defending his people. But he had no training to back up the act, which made him unpredictable. Neighbors huddled behind curtains. Phones tilted higher. A whisper carried across the street. She's not even flinching. She must know what she's doing. Douglas whipped his head toward the voice, the gun following. The barrel swung too close toward a nearby house. Gasps echoed in the night. Eyes on me, Douglas. Simone's voice sliced through the air. You're scattering that weapon all over the block. You could have just aimed at your own neighbor's child without even realizing it. For the first time, hesitation flickered across his face. Sweat slid down his temple. His bravado cracked slightly, though pride held him firm. You don't get it, he snapped. I'm the safety committee chair. I keep crime out. I know what trouble looks like. But Simone's composure only deepened. Trouble, she thought, is exactly what you've created. Her hand moved slowly to her purse. She spoke deliberately, giving him every signal not to panic. I'm going to show you something, Douglas. You'll want to see it before you make another mistake. Don't try anything, he warned, voice breaking. I'll shoot if you make a move. Carefully, Simone opened her bag. From it, she pulled a leather case, holding it flat in her palm so every neighbor could see. The gold badge gleamed under the streetlights, catching the eyes of onlookers before it caught his. FBI Tactical Command. Sacramento Field Office. Gasps broke out across the porches. Phones zoomed closer. The whispers erupted into sharp recognition. She's FBI. He pointed a gun at an agent. Douglas froze. His mouth opened, then closed. His grip loosened, though the barrel still wavered in her direction. You're lying, he muttered weakly. But the conviction was gone. The audience had shifted. They weren't seeing him as protector anymore. They were seeing him as the aggressor, a man who had just drawn a gun on one of the highest trained federal officers in the country. Simone didn't move closer. She didn't need to. The badge was speaking for her now. But pride is stubborn. Douglas's hands trembled, his finger twitching dangerously near the trigger. His audience was watching. His authority, his identity, his control, all of it was unraveling. And just when it seemed the confrontation might finally break, the night air split open with the sharp wail of sirens. Red and blue lights spilled across the block, bouncing off windows, washing the street in pulsing color. Neighbors murmured louder. Children cried. Phones raised higher. And Douglas Brinton, with a pistol still clutched in his hands, suddenly realized he wasn't just facing a woman in her driveway anymore. He was facing the law. The sirens grew louder, slicing through the night like a blade. Red and blue lights spilled across the cul-de-sac, bouncing off windows and casting every porch in sharp, pulsing colors. Neighbors shifted, some ducking back into their homes, others raising their phones higher, unwilling to miss what was about to unfold. Douglas Brinton's face flickered between anger and fear. His hands trembled more visibly now, the pistol wobbling like a pendulum. For the first time, he realized the stage wasn't his anymore. The cameras weren't his. The narrative wasn't his. 2 squad cars screeched to a halt. Doors swung open. 4 officers stepped out, weapons drawn. Their voices cut across the chaos. Drop the gun. Put it down. Now. For a split second, Douglas looked stunned, as if the orders couldn't possibly be directed at him. But they were. And when he turned toward the flashing lights, gun still in hand, the panic spread through the crowd like fire. Children screamed. A neighbor shouted, "He's going to shoot!" The officers stiffened, ready to fire. Before disaster could erupt, Simone raised her badge high into the pulsing light. Her voice cut through the panic, calm but commanding. FBI Tactical Command. The armed suspect is HOA Chair Douglas Brinton. I am a resident and a federal agent. He has been threatening me with this weapon for several minutes. The word FBI hit the block like a thunderclap. Neighbors gasped. Some repeated it in whispers. The officers hesitated just long enough to register the truth staring back at them. Douglas's face twisted, caught between outrage and panic. She's lying. She's making it up. That's not real. She doesn't live here. But the officers weren't buying it. Mr. Brinton, drop your weapon now. You are aiming a firearm at a federal agent and a homeowner. This is your final warning. Reality closed in on him. He wasn't the protector anymore. He wasn't the safety chair. He was the suspect. The man cornered under flashing lights, surrounded by neighbors recording every move. But pride dies hard. I was protecting this community, Douglas shouted, his voice cracking as his arms wavered. She doesn't belong here. Simone's tone sharpened, disbelief laced with steel. Protecting them? You nearly pointed that gun at a child 2 doors down. You waved it at your own neighbor's wife. That isn't protection. That's reckless endangerment. Douglas's eyes darted wildly from porch to porch, desperate for validation. But the faces staring back weren't loyal anymore. They were horrified. Some shouted back at him, furious. Others whispered in disbelief. The officers closed in. Voices overlapped, firm and final. Drop it. On the ground. Douglas's weapon dipped, then rose again, his pride tugging it upward like invisible strings. His chest heaved, his knuckles whitened around the grip. And then Simone's words cut through the madness like a scalpel. You can go down as the man who admitted he was wrong and put the gun away. Or as the man who pointed it at an FBI agent and lost everything. Is this how you want your neighbors to remember you? The silence was suffocating. His grip shook violently. He looked like a man drowning, thrashing against the tide. Finally, with a guttural sound that was half growl, half sob, Douglas lowered the pistol. It clattered against the driveway, loud and final. The officers surged forward. One kicked the weapon aside. Another grabbed his wrists, snapping cuffs tight around them. Douglas shouted as they pulled him back. You're making a mistake. She doesn't belong here. She tricked all of you. But his words fell flat. The cruiser door slammed shut, his protests muffled behind glass and steel. Simone exhaled, the first real release of tension since the standoff began. Her badge slipped back into her jacket. She stood tall, not triumphant, but resolute. Around her, the neighborhood shifted from whispers to debates. Some expressed relief. Others simmered with anger, defending Douglas even in handcuffs. The truth was undeniable. A man who claimed to protect them had turned their quiet street into a potential crime scene. But while the weapon was gone and Douglas was cuffed, the real battle wasn't over. The fallout had only begun. The flashing lights didn't fade quickly. They multiplied. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars rolled in, followed by a supervisor's SUV. The quiet cul-de-sac was now a blaze of red and blue, like a breaking news scene unfolding in real time. Douglas Brinton sat on the curb, wrists cuffed behind his back, his face twisted in outrage. His reflective vest glared under the strobes, turning him into a neon warning sign. He never stopped yelling. Even with officers on both sides holding him down, his voice carried. This is wrong. You don't understand. I was protecting the neighborhood. She doesn't belong here. His words rang hollow. Neighbors shifted, whispering in small groups, no longer sure if the man they once trusted had been their protector or their greatest threat. Simone stood steady near her SUV, her posture calm, her voice composed, though her pulse was still catching up to the last 10 minutes. She had faced armed suspects across cities, lobbies, parking garages, but this had been her own driveway. A sergeant approached, flipping open a notepad. He was older, maybe late 40s, his tone professional but respectful. Agent Kerns, can you walk me through what happened? She explained, pulling into her driveway, identifying herself as the homeowner, his accusations, the drawn weapon, her credentials revealed, his refusal to de-escalate until officers arrived. The sergeant wrote carefully, glancing up between lines. And you've lived here how long? He asked. 3 months. Unit 314. Title is in my name. The sergeant gave a nod. We'll confirm with the HOA records, but I believe you. He glanced over at Douglas, still ranting in his vest. Looks like he's headed for charges. Assault with a deadly weapon, menacing, reckless endangerment. But I'll be honest, Agent, some of these folks still think he was protecting them. It may get messy. Simone's expression didn't shift. Messy doesn't change the facts. He aimed a loaded firearm at a federal officer in her own driveway. And every camera on this block has it. The sergeant closed his notebook. Fair enough. Around them, the neighbors' whispers had grown into arguments. A woman muttered that she'd always thought Doug was too extreme with his security obsession. Another man snapped back that without Doug, the neighborhood would be vulnerable. One shouted, he's not the villain. He was the only one who cared about safety. Another fired back. Safety? He nearly killed her. The divide was clear. Some defended Douglas out of loyalty or fear. Others finally admitted he had gone too far. Douglas's shouting didn't stop even as officers hauled him to the cruiser. You'll regret this. I kept this place safe. You're all blind. The door slammed shut, cutting his voice into muffled noise. The neighbors lingered in the flashing light, restless and divided. Some approached Simone, offering quiet words. "Glad you're okay. I'm so sorry you went through that." Others avoided her gaze, unwilling to let go of their allegiance to Douglas. But Simone didn't need validation. She had been in enough standoffs to know the truth wasn't decided in whispers. It was preserved in evidence. And this street had been recording from every angle. When the last cruiser pulled away, the neighborhood was left in a heavy silence. Porch lights clicked off one by one. Curtains closed. But the calm didn't settle. Simone stood under her own garage light, her body steady though her mind raced. The adrenaline drained, leaving behind the restless weight she knew too well after field operations. Except this wasn't a mission. This was her home. And she knew the night had only planted the seeds. The real battle would come next, inside the walls of the HOA clubhouse. The emergency HOA meeting was called less than 48 hours later. Word spread faster than wildfire. Emails blasted through inboxes. Texts lit up group chats, and flyers were taped to mailboxes by a neighbor who thought paper carried more weight than pixels. By the time Simone walked into the clubhouse that Thursday evening, the air was thick with tension. The small hall smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Metal chairs scraped across the floor, arranged in uneven rows. Where normally 20 residents gathered for budget updates and landscaping disputes, more than 60 people had packed in. Some stood against the back wall, arms crossed. Others held their phones high, ready to record. At the front sat the board, for members pale, rattled, shuffling papers nervously. Their chairwoman, Margaret Dwyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s, banged her gavel with shaky authority. "Order, please. Let's get started." The chatter dimmed but never disappeared. The first voice wasn't from the board. It was from the crowd. A man shot up before introductions were done. Tommy Brandt, one of Douglas's most vocal supporters. His finger stabbed the air like an accusation. Douglas Brinton was protecting us. He's the only one who cared enough to patrol at night. And now he's sitting in jail like a criminal while criminals walk free. That's a disgrace. Cheers rose from his corner. But just as quickly, a woman countered, her voice sharp with outrage. "A disgrace? He nearly shot our neighbor. He pointed a gun at a federal agent in her own driveway." Arguments erupted instantly. "He didn't know she was FBI," someone shouted. "That doesn't matter," another fired back. "She showed him she lived there. And he still aimed the gun." The gavel banged again. Margaret raised her voice, strained but firm. "Enough. We will not shout over one another like children. Each person will have their turn." The room simmered, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally, Margaret gestured toward the middle row. "Agent Kerns, since this concerns you most directly, perhaps you should speak first." Every head swiveled. The spotlight found Simone whether she wanted it or not. She rose calmly, smoothing her sleeve, stepping forward into the open space. Her voice carried even and steady across the room, sharp enough to cut through murmurs. "I didn't want to be here under these circumstances. I moved into this community to build a safe home for my daughter and myself. But on Tuesday night, I was met not with safety, but with a neighbor pointing a loaded gun at me because he decided I didn't belong." The room hushed. I've spent 20 years teaching federal agents how to de-escalate armed situations. And the fact that I had to use those skills in my own driveway is unacceptable. Safety doesn't come from untrained people carrying weapons and intimidating residents. It comes from trust, from responsibility, from accountability. A scoff cut the silence. "Easy for you to say when you've got a badge." Simone's gaze fixed on the man, steady. "The badge didn't keep me alive Tuesday night. My composure did. And the only reason you're not watching a tragedy on the evening news is because I knew how to stop one angry man from making the worst mistake of his life." Murmurs swept across the crowd. Some nodded. Others frowned. No one dared interrupt again. Then, slowly, a woman rose from the far side of the room. Her voice trembled but held strength. "I was one of the people who thought Douglas made us safer. But watching him wave that gun, I realized he wasn't protecting anyone. He was feeding his own need for control. We all saw it. Her words shifted the room. Douglas's defenders fidgeted, searching for backup. His critics straightened, emboldened. Margaret tapped her gavel again. This board will be voting tonight on Mr. Brinton's removal from the safety committee. We will also consider a motion to ban armed patrols by private residents. Only licensed security or police will be authorized moving forward. The declaration was gasoline on the fire. Arguments exploded again. Some shouted about rights, others about common sense. But Simone stayed silent now. She had said what needed to be said. The choice was no longer hers to make. It belonged to the community, divided, loud, and facing itself in the mirror. Finally, her voice rose one last time, cutting through the noise. You all have a choice. Do you want safety rooted in paranoia, or safety rooted in trust? Because what happened in my driveway could have happened to any of you, or your children. And next time, there may not be someone trained enough to stop it. Her words dropped into the room like a stone into water. The ripples silenced even the angriest shouts. Margaret cleared her throat. The vote will proceed. But Simone knew the paper ballots and motions were just procedure. The real decision would linger far longer. In every whisper, every side glance, every HOA gathering from this night forward. The time Simone closed her front door that night, the echoes of the HOA meeting still clung to her ears. Arguments, accusations, desperate defenses of Douglas. The voices circled in her head like restless ghosts. She dropped her keys into the ceramic dish by the entryway and leaned against the wall, letting out a long breath. The house was quiet. Her daughter was staying overnight with a friend. That silence was both a relief and a weight. For 20 years, Simone had walked into homes after dangerous assignments and left the tension at the door. Tonight, it had followed her inside. Her phone buzzed. An old colleague, Marcus Bellamy, had sent a message. Heard what happened. You good? She typed back. Safe. Shaken. But safe. It was true. She was safe. But shaken in a way she hadn't expected. She had stood in her own driveway while a man she barely knew decided she didn't belong. It hadn't mattered that she had the garage remote in her hand, or that her name was on the deed. He had already written her role in his story before she'd even rolled down the window. That judgment lingered heavier than the threat of the weapon. The days that followed carried a strange rhythm. News spread beyond the subdivision, first through gossip blogs, then through local outlets. Clips recorded by neighbors circulated online, racking up views by the thousands. Commentators debated whether Douglas had been a misguided protector or a dangerous vigilante. For Simone, the headlines didn't matter. What mattered were the choices that night. Douglas choosing suspicion over trust, paranoia over peace, and her choosing restraint over escalation. Those decisions had drawn the line between survival and tragedy. On Saturday morning, Simone stood on her porch with a mug of coffee. Children rode bikes again. Lawns were trimmed. Neighbors waved politely, some warmly, some hesitantly. The divide was still there, pulsing beneath the surface. Her daughter stepped outside, hair pulled back, curiosity sharp in her teenage eyes. Mom, people at school are talking about you. They saw the video. They can't believe you stayed calm with a gun in your face. Simone smiled softly. Staying calm is what kept me alive. It's what kept him from ruining his life too. Her daughter frowned. But why did he think you didn't belong? You live here. You pay the bills. Why wasn't that enough? Simone sipped her coffee, weighing her words carefully. Sometimes people don't see what's in front of them. They see what they want to see. Their fears, their assumptions, their pride. And when those things mix with power, even imagined power, it turns dangerous. Her daughter's gaze fell to the porch steps. That's not fair. No, Simone agreed softly. It's not. But that's why we don't meet anger with more anger. That's why we use our voice, our judgment. Because if I had let his fear control me, too, you wouldn't be asking me these questions right now. The HOA's vote came days later. Douglas Brinton was permanently removed from all committees. Armed patrols by private residents were officially banned. The language of the motion was dry, bureaucratic, but the message was clear. Change had been forced upon them by the weight of one night that nearly cost a life. But Simone knew the deeper change couldn't be legislated. It had to be lived, remembered, retold. Weeks passed. Some neighbors avoided her eyes. Others brought quiet words of thanks. A few pretended nothing had ever happened, as if silence could erase the footage that lived online forever. Simone carried forward not the bitterness of the night, but the clarity of its lesson. Real safety doesn't come from paranoia. It doesn't come from pointing guns at those who don't fit narrow ideas of belonging. It comes from restraint, from responsibility, from knowing when to act and when to stand down. That was what had carried her through 2 decades in the FBI. And that was what carried her through the driveway confrontation without a bullet fired. Later, when a reporter asked her to sum it up, Simone answered simply, "Safety isn't about fear. It's about judgment. Fear makes you pull a gun. Judgment tells you when not to, and that difference can save lives." The reporter scribbled furiously, but Simone didn't elaborate. She didn't need to, because the truth wasn't complicated. It was simple, and it was already captured forever in the cameras of her neighbors, in the silence of her daughter's questions, and in the memory of a community that would never forget the night its so-called protector became the threat. And perhaps, in that lesson, Fairgrove Estates might finally learn what safety really meant.